All right. The Hangout on air is live. So we are here for LangCamp Hangout number 6, and we are talking about classroom procedures and routines. Basically, how to survive the day and get the most out of every day, I guess. So we are here with several LangCamp homies, and I am Laura Sexton. I do a blog on pblonthetl.com, and I would like my LangChat homies to introduce themselves. I would like to start with Melissa.
All right, I'm Melissa Kerrigan. I teach Spanish 1 and 2 at the high school level in the Chicagoland area. I'm going to start my third year teaching in August, and I'm looking just for tips and um, trying to figure out what you guys might do for classroom routines and procedures to get the kids involved and attentive and cooperative with them, and maybe some tips on how to stay consistent, because that's one of my biggest faults, I think.
Yeah, we were talking about consistency before, and that's also one of my weaknesses is the consistency. So if Linda and Jennifer have any tips on that, we're both looking for that. So Linda, could you introduce yourself next?
Hello, my name is Linda Kelchner, and I teach Spanish 1, 2, 3, and 4 at Greater Nanticoke Area High School in northeastern PA. We're in the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton area, about 2 hours from New York, 2 hours from Philadelphia. And I am a fanatic of routines, I guess. My brain works in that way. So I would say more even than for the kids is that I like to have a routine for myself. With being the only Spanish teacher and having all 4 levels, and I don't have levels necessarily back to back. It's not like I teach all Spanish 2 and then they're done for the day. My brain gets a little fogged sometimes. So it keeps me a lot more on track if I do have a fairly well-established routine. So, but I'm always up for hearing other people's ideas and taking them and adapting them for my room. So I'm excited to hear what people have to say today.
So glad to have you here so that we have someone who feels like they know what they're doing. Beautiful.
We'll see.
Well, you at least have something in mind to work from to start with.
Yes.
And Jennifer, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I am a high school Spanish teacher. I just finished my first year teaching high school Spanish in California. Before that, I taught 4 years of middle school Spanish in Massachusetts. So I took the leap, So I changed from middle school to high school and changed from Massachusetts to California all at the same time. So I finished 1 year teaching Spanish 1 and 2, but next year I'm going to be teaching Spanish 2 and 3. And I'm a big fan of procedures and routines, and so that the students know, they come in knowing what to expect. They know how the day is going to kind of go. But I have a hard time sticking to them and changing things at the last minute, and sometimes just being completely unorganized. This last year, I literally had to plan the whole year as I taught it because it was a brand new curriculum, and we now for this year are adopting a brand new curriculum, and so I'm going to be doing the same thing all over again with new levels and a new textbook that we're supposed to be using.
Oh, yeah, been there, done that, and it's painful, but if you can do anything for a year, my mentor always used to say. So you have done that for a year, you've seen what it's like, you survived it, so we can go from there. So one thing I would like to start off with talking about the routines and procedures is this was kind of a combination of requests that we had for LangCamp. Some people wanted to talk about classroom culture, some people wanted to talk about organization, some people wanted to talk about lesson plans, and I felt it kind of fit in with that. So like basically we're looking to establish expectations, I think, and like how our class is supposed to go and what we expect from kids as far as their participation. Would you agree that that's kind of what we're looking for here today?
I would definitely say so. I think particularly as we're moving towards more proficiency-based curriculum, that our classes are unlike anything that kids experience at all during the day. So they don't necessarily know how to act in our rooms. They don't necessarily know what the normal expectations of sit there, be quiet, take notes, do this activity don't apply in our rooms. And I think for some kids who've played the school game for 9, 10, 11, 12 years, that freaks them out a little bit when they are in our rooms. And I think that establishing those procedures and routines up front, taking the time the first week or two of school to really lay down, like, this is how we work in here, is time saving in the long run. And it's a comfort. If you're a kid who, like me, like I said, I crave routine, that I probably would have flipped out in my own classroom, the first week or two because it was totally new. So I think for a lot of our kids that's a comfort for them. So.
As someone who has freaked out their kids before, I think that is absolutely like one of probably the most important focus of having procedures and routines. My brain does not handle routines well, and so like I have to make very conscious efforts to do it because I freak out my kids if I don't. And so like I've had to do a lot. I've had to work really hard at establishing things so that they would know what was expected of them, then that it was not what success looked like, what
Right.
participation looked like. And so that being said, my question is, what happens in our classes that could freak out our kids? So I think that is one of the main things that we need to do for them is address their freakouts.
I would say the biggest thing that with my students is the fact that you're not always going to understand, and that's okay. It's okay to not understand, but it's not okay to not let me know that you don't understand. Does that make sense?
Excellent point.
And getting the kids to realize, like, the fact that you're not understanding me isn't necessarily your fault. You might not be paying as close attention as you need to, whatever, that may be the case, but more than likely it's my fault that you're not understanding. And more importantly, it's my job to make sure that you do understand. But I can't do my job if you don't let me know. So
absolutely. I like that very much.
I think kids are so used to hiding not understanding that that's something that's really hard to get them to break out of.
Going along with that, I would say that in terms of like listening activities or even reading activities, students are so focused on understanding every single word. They think they need to understand every single word in order to know what's going on, and I stress over and over and over again that you just need the general idea. If you can figure out what the general idea of the sentence is, you don't, everything else will kind of piece together. I know this is off topic, but that was just something that came to mind when you were talking about understanding you, and understanding the procedures is part of that as well.
I totally agree with both of you. And kind of going off that, spinning in maybe a little bit of a different direction, you're not going to understand everything, and you have to piece things together, and that's okay. And you have to let me know when you're not understanding, but also like you're going to be making mistakes in this class, and you're going to, your neighbor's going to, I'm going to as the teacher, and that's okay. That's part of the language learning and process. And I totally get where they're coming from. I hate making mistakes. I hate being wrong. And, especially for the kids that play the game, the school game, and that's really difficult for them, the learning route versus the school game. I need to get the A. I need to get the correct answer. So I find that a really big struggle, and I freak out my kids a lot in that way, expecting them to make mistakes because they don't want to.
So I'm hearing three of the biggest things that I absolutely love. Like the first thing is that we need to prepare kids to not understand everything, but also register to communicate when they're not understanding enough, and that we also need to prepare kids to make mistakes, to take risks. And the third thing that I'm really liking that I'm hearing is the responsibility level for us as the educators, because we are the ones who know what should be happening, and we are the ones who know where it is all headed. Even if we communicate to them, they may or may not believe us, but we're the ones who have seen it before. So I really like the attitude of it might be my fault, and that is not the end of the world for them or for us. So the more that we can prepare, the more they can feel prepared, and I think that's very important, and that can be part of the frustration for teachers in this day and age. Like, well, I did my part. I don't know why they're not learning, but like that's what we're trying to figure out now is what we can do so that they can learn, so that they can feel comfortable. So as far as either taking risks or not understanding, what are some ways that you guys have or could make your students feel comfortable with those two freaky situations?
I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but I like to kind of make myself more human to them and kind of play on my mistakes. Last summer, I spent 3 weeks in Ecuador, and there was a like big communication error, and I wasn't supposed to cross a path that I crossed, and I ended up like slipping down this huge, like not huge, but it was like a little cliff hill thing, and it was totally fine, like nothing bad happened. But I like to explain that like everybody makes errors, including your teacher, you know, and I'm standing up here and I still can speak Spanish, and I'm still, you know, a teacher, and I love my job and I do my job, but I don't know, I do it too, so it's okay. And in addition to that, you know, not pointing out every single error that I hear. You know, if they say like yo es or like to soy, you know, that's okay as long as they're getting their point across. I try to emphasize that as well, which kind of goes with the understanding. You know, you have to piece together what you're hearing to find the main idea or any supporting details to get the main idea. But same thing kind of with output. I can understand what you're saying. You know, if you say like yo es alta, you know, I can understand that, and trying to teach them that that's okay, and then we'll refine as we go along. I don't know if I'm just babbling or if this is actually coherent, but those are a couple of things that I try to do.
So do you have a procedure for error correction then? Like, do you do something in particular when you can't understand them or when it is a repeated pattern? Do you guys have a procedure in those scenarios?
I would say usually what I'm doing, if students are doing some sort of pair speaking activity, I'm usually circulating, and I have really good hearing. The kids are marveled at it. So I can very easily be in a corner of the room and can hear them, you know, someone up at the front of the room without a problem. And they're like, I can't believe she heard me say that. And the kids tend to get nervous when, you know, I'm nearby. So if I'm circulating, I try to make it look like I'm doing something else too, like I'm organizing papers or I'm doing something else, but I'm really eavesdropping on them. And then what I'll do is just kind of take some mental notes about what are the repeated patterns of error that I'm hearing. And then just after we go over the activity as a group, I may bring up and say, okay, this is a lot of what I was hearing a lot of yo es today. Can anybody see? You got your point across. We understood what you were saying, but how can we make this more accurate so that, you know, there's no chance for miscommunication, and kind of just bring that back to the group. You know, is it the most effective? Probably not, but at least the kids who are paying attention and the kids who want to refine their accuracy are going to get, you know, that little bit of re-instruction. So that's what I do right now. There's definite room for improvement.
I think that's an important step because, like, one of the things that I experiment a lot with is the PACE method of grammar, the present the pattern, draw attention to the pattern, co-construct the rule, and then extend it. So what you're doing is you're drawing attention to the pattern and to the problem. And I think maybe if you took it one step further, it might be even more effective, like for a wider variety of them. So, like, if you say, okay, now let's put this in practice. Now that's a tricky thing to do on the fly. So my question to you guys is, what would be a way that you could do a quick practice where they could put it into context and use a pattern that you may have noticed as you were sneakily circulating?
I don't know if I'm answering the question you're asking or not, but I don't know if they were going back to Linda's example, if they were having a conversation with partners and you heard the you know, yo es or whatever, you could pose a question to the class and that was like como eres tú or something like that, and they had to brainstorm, you know, 3 different sentences of ways to answer that question, so that they're like they're thinking about it, and you give them the wait time they need to process the question and figure out an answer after you've already modeled some sentences, but now they're personalizing it, internalizing it, and personalizing it to make it apply to themselves. I don't know.
And I would say maybe even to draw a contrast between the yo soy, you know, él es, ella es, maybe have the person say like, okay, yo soy inteligente, and then turn and look at the person next to them and say, ¿Cómo eres tú? And then that person answers, yo soy blah, 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 and then the first person has to go back, okay, yo soy inteligente, Laura es cómica. And then Laura says, yo soy cómica. ¿Cómo eres tú? The person next to her, and that person is, oh, yo soy whatever, and kind of repeating that way to draw the distinction between the two different forms.
I love that. That reminds me of owl language a little bit, where they like go around and like they ask the questions to like everybody in a circle, and like they say, ¿Cómo eres? ¿Eres bonita? Muy bien. ¿Eres bonita? ¿Él es bonito? Oh no, él no es bonito, es feo. See, no. I mean, like they just ask and answer, and like they get yes and no's out of the kids, and then maybe take it a step further with the snake kind of thing, like the snake around the room, kind of like you were talking about, or even just like turn and talk with their partners. I think that could work too. Just the point, as long as you model and then have them practice together. I think that would solve that. That'd be a great procedure. Okay. So how else do you guys handle the freaky situations? We talked about if we see common patterns, not correcting them every time, just correcting the overall patterns with practice. What about getting them to take risks, and what about getting them to feel comfortable with what they do and don't understand?
I have a hard time getting them to take risks. They'll often, if I going back to the same example, if I pose the question, ¿Cómo eres tú? I get, even in Spanish 2 class, I'll get, yo soy baja, yo soy inteligente, and I want them to expand on that. And so sometimes I hate putting numbers on things, but sometimes I have to tell them, like, okay, your sentence has to be at least 8 words long or something like that. And then sometimes I have native speakers where I teach and that are mixed in with my classes, and so sometimes I'll turn to one of them and have them pose an example instead of me giving them an example that's probably repeated every day in class. I have one of the students come up with an example that's maybe a little bit more elaborate, and then say, like, okay, like, see if you can do something similar to this, or you can push yourself to make it more complex than this.
With the rubrics that I use at school, they're kind of a hodgepodge of JCPS rubrics and some stuff from Fairfax County, Virginia. And one of the elements on the rubric is task completion. And the difference between meets expectations and exceeds expectations is that elaboration and detail. So like you had said, like always trying to kind of push the kids to give an extended response. Okay, yo soy baja y qué más? Getting them to go in and even sometimes mentioning, like, all right, well, that answer right now, that's a 2. You gave me basic information. What could you do, if this were an assessment, how could you push yourself up to a 3 or a 4? But Jennifer, I wanted to ask you too, what do you do with native speakers? Like, we're a fairly homogenous area population-wise, but the population is definitely changing, and we are getting more and more heritage speakers. And despite the fact that I feel that we have enough right now where I would love to have a heritage speaker class, I've been denied. I'm hoping next year or the year after it will be approved. How do you handle the heritage speaker kids who want to correct every word that comes out of a Spanish 1 student's mouth? I find that so challenging.
I don't have those students.
Okay.
So at our school we do have heritage classes, but they fill up very quickly. I mean, California, there's like giant population, and so they fill up very quickly, and then the overflow gets put into the classes where they don't really belong. Like I can't even tell you how many native Spanish speakers in Spanish 1 this past year where they absolutely didn't belong. They don't need to learn how to count and spells and all that stuff. And so it was tough because a lot of them would just lose interest because they're like, well, I know this, and a lot of them didn't even really. Some of them seemed like they didn't really care to push themselves or care to expand on what they already knew, and their grades reflected that. But there were some who would step it up and kind of almost on certain days take almost like a teacher assistant role where they were helping other students. If I knew they could do the stuff, although if it was a speaking exercise, like they could do it no problem. When it came to writing, that was where they had a lot more difficulty. So if it was a conversational exercise, they would sometimes kind of be my aide and walk around and help out where needed. But at the same time, they were kind of the mindset where I need to be, where they think, well, if I understand what they're saying, if I even though it's not perfect, I still know what they mean, and everybody would know what they were talking about. So what does it matter? You know, what does it matter if they're making a mistake? And that's how they kind of felt about their own Spanish too. Was, well, you know what I'm talking about, so what does it matter? You know.
Right.
So I don't have a magic answer for you. I'm sorry.
Yep. Myself, when I have heritage speakers, I usually only have like maybe 3 or 4, and mostly I just distract them. Mine are not really worried about precision so much, but like when we do paired things, I pair them together as much as possible, because I also evaluate them at a higher level, because some of them are getting Spanish 3 credits instead of Spanish 2, for example. And so like they're expected to do intermediate demonstrations, whereas my other students are expected to do novice high, for example.
Okay.
And so like I pair them together so they can go into the elaboration, because they get really frustrated trying to elaborate with a partner that doesn't understand them. So
Right.
like, so one routine that I would do is pair them with each other. And the distraction thing, like, you probably know, I'm obsessed with Genius Hour, and so it's like, all right, we're going to be doing like the owl language kind of thing, where I ask and answer a lot about, ¿tú eres baja? No, eres alta, and then back and forth, and they're just like rolling their eyes, and they just get up and go to the computer and like go start pinning about their Genius Hour topic or something,
Okay.
or like writing something about it, or they get started on their homework choice thing. But like I have a couple of things that are like ongoing things they can always work on that are appropriate for their level, that they can self-select to some extent. So I use a lot of student choice to.
Okay, this past year I had 5 heritage speakers, well, 4 heritage speakers and 1 brand new to the United States from the Dominican Republic student who they thought, let's put her in a Spanish 1 class because that's an appropriate placement for her. And they were all in separate classes except for one of the heritage speakers and the native speaker, which was awful because then they're like the lone wolf in the class. So what I did do, and God only knows if it will be granted, but I did request that at the very least those students be placed into the same Spanish 2 class for next year. So then I'm hoping that they can kind of do maybe like a sort of literature circle with one of the higher TPRS novels. Because again, as Jennifer pointed out, like their literacy skills obviously aren't necessarily the best, and that is a area where they do need strength. So I'm hoping that will be something that I could do, and just kind of have them not totally run independently, but at least have them be more distracted and not have the class be a waste of time for them. It breaks my heart. Like I'm not meeting their needs at all. They have needs. I know what those needs are. But the way that it's set up, like there's no way that I could, meet them. It's not even differentiating instruction. It's a totally different prep.
It is. And so I think meeting their needs is one of the most important things. Like I've had some girls that were all about the poetry, or they wanted to read like Jenny Rivera's autobiography. And so like I only had a couple of them, so like I was like, all right, let's go on Amazon, and I got them a Jenny Rivera autobiography under the assumption that I will eventually read it too. So like find something that they want to do anyway. Well, I had one boy who did not choose to do the Spanish 3 level and Spanish 2, so he was getting regular credit. But if I could get him started on Final Fantasy 4 versus Final Fantasy 7, he would go on and on and on in Spanish. Like he would write like a dissertation on why Final Fantasy 7 is not superior just because it's newer. So like if you can tap into one of those interests, whether it is something like poetry or a TPRS novel, I think if you have the resources, or if you have something like even your own collection and say, hey, you want to pick one of these, if you can tap into their general interests, otherwise I think you have a better chance of not wasting their time.
Well, I had a student teacher for 2nd semester last year, and the native speaker and the one heritage speaker were not exactly the most well-behaved for her. She was having some major issues with them. So at that point I said to her, you know what, why don't I pull them out? And we can use this time. I'm available. We can use this time to, do something that is more appropriate for them. And we actually read La Llorona de Mazatlan. And they're 2 14-year-old girls who are typical boy crazy 14-year-old girls, and they totally got into the story of Luis, and they did reader response journals, and we read aloud a lot, and we did a lot of hypothetical. Well, if I were Lainey, I would da 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 da, and they really, really got into it, and I felt like that was such a great experience. It was wonderful for me to be able to connect with the girls that way. It was great Spanish practice for me. Because when you're teaching lower levels all day, your own Spanish can get a little bit rusty. And I really feel like they learned, particularly the heritage speaker who is Puerto Rican, and she'll say things like, oh, mis ojos son brown. So she'll use the word brown, just kind of say things like, and she's like, isn't that the right word? And then we have to have these conversations about register and different, dialect and what's appropriate in certain places. But I feel like just reading that book, which I think is a level 2 or 3 book, was great for her to expose her to kind of some more standard language. So.
Now, Regina has a question in the Q&A. It says, how do you keep them interested? Most of my native speakers tend to zone out because it is so hard to really have multiple things going on at once, especially when we are having a group discussion. And I think this is where the procedures and routines do come in very handy. So, like, if we're having a group discussion, so, like, there's 2 kinds of group discussions that we could be having in, like, my Spanish 1 or 2 class. We could be having one where I'm trying to get kids practice and familiar with the structure, which is really, really pretty useless to the native speakers. But if we're having a discussion about the project, like what's going to be due when, I really need them to be a part of it. But if it's one of the useless ones, if we have the routine in place, like this is what you're going to do. You're going to go pick up the Llorona de Mazatlan book when we start talking about this. Give me the eye signal, like make eye contact, nod your head to the corner that you're going to read in, and go. Like, and then if you have like a reader response journal, like this is what I want you to have by the end of the grading period. I think having that routine in place so that they don't have to participate in things that they feel like are a waste of time would be like the perfect way to keep everybody happy. Now, if we're dealing with people who are kind of who are not the best behaved, then they might not be able to get as much freedom with that kind of thing. So they might have to be somewhere that they could still be observed. But if they are people who are getting their work done, maybe they get to go out in the hall and work on it. Maybe they get to go to the cafeteria and work on their library. We don't have a library really, so they can have more freedom. But I had another student who was really good with the Spanish, but not as well behaved. So he would just have to be on a computer where I could see him, and he had to have very specific goals laid out for him. So that is one of the perfect situations where routine and procedures can save the day. Do you guys have any other ideas on what to do, especially during group discussion with heritage speakers?
I haven't really had the experience of, like I said, other than having those 2 girls in the same class because they've been kind of all over the place. But again, I think trying to include them and trying to get a little bit more out of them, get them to respond a little bit more, get them to feel that even though this is pretty simple for you, I do know that you have something valuable to say. And I think that some of the old-fashioned, I guess, behavior or classroom management tricks of, proximity, eye contact, and even name dropping, are good. So we could say like, okay, Jose dijo que blah, 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 and then, go on to the next person, and then maybe go back and, mention the kid again, like, oh, what was it that Jose said? And, try to keep them engaged and at least attentive. It's so hard. Like, it gets me angry, like, really, when I think it's just such an injustice that these heritage speakers are thrown into these basic level classes. Like, I think if I went to school when I was in high school, would I have been thrown into, in English, if I went, to high school in Peru or whatever, would I have been thrown into an, English 101 class? Like, that would have been ridiculous. And honestly, like, as frustrating as it can be, I don't blame kids for their poor behavior in that situation. I am kind of rambling at this point, but I don't think I've actually answered the question. I'm just kind of going off here on my thoughts about this. But it definitely is frustrating. And I think that if you can have some of those separate activities with very clear expectations for them, that would be great. And I think even if you do want to use them as a helper, as kind of a teacher's assistant, not just say, hey, you're my helper today, but again, giving them a very specific job. What I want you to do is, if you're noticing certain mistakes, can you jot them down for me so that I can remember to go over them later, or something like that. But I don't know.
And that's one of the reasons why Laura had suggested doing the student choice assignments for one of the hangouts. Specifically, I was thinking about for my native speakers, where instead of, I get that example, instead of a basic homework assignment that students would need to practice a vocab lesson or grammar lesson in a Spanish 2 class, for example. Instead of doing something basic, having an alternative lesson or where they can choose to be more creative and be more personal with the assignment. That's just something that I was hoping to develop for this coming school year. It's something I haven't done in the past, so that was something I was looking forward to experimenting with.
Definitely one to put on the list. I did want to mention one thing before we move on from the heritage speaker question, is that when I have had the kids who were higher level things separated, I have had them do blog posts and comment on each other's. So they could do asynchronous type of communication, even if they couldn't like record a conversation together or something. But usually I have a couple in the same class. Jennifer already posted a question that she wanted to get to, a procedural question. What is your procedure when a student asks, how do you say in Spanish? It's a good question. So I make mine say como se dice, first of all, and I usually have 2 steps or 2 possible first steps, unless it's something that they're gonna need. So like the first thing, if we've studied it all before, and we're doing independent work, I'll like go flip to it in their book. But if we're like all working together, I will, in their interactive notebook, I will say ve la página 6, and they're like, oh, yeah, and they go find it. Or if they're starting to say something they really don't need to know how to say yet, if they're getting overly complicated, this is where my essential verbs list has become really handy. So like they're trying to say, like, have you ever done this? And I was like, how can we simplify that? How can we take that back using one of these verbs that you've used before? So like, what if we took tiene and say tienes experiencia con, instead of saying has probado alguna vez and stuff like that. It's like I could tell them how to say that, but they're not going to remember it. So let's use something that they do know. So I either refer them to the notebooks, get them to simplify with essential verbs, or I'll write it on the, well, I make them beg if they want to see it written. Like they have to say como se escribe also. And then I'll write it on the board, and sometimes I'll do a doodle, but mostly I like try and explain it and put it on the board for them. What do you guys do?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say I have two big things that go on in my class, and one is that students just try to directly translate from English, and I try to explain to them that they can speak more complexly in English than they can in Spanish, and so you can't just do a direct translation of what you're trying to say, and you need to simplify it. So I definitely need to get that essentials verbs, up and posted in my room. The other thing that I was thinking about when I asked the question was, if you're doing a unit on pastimes or something, and you ask them like, what do you like to do in your free time, and you've taught them a whole bunch of vocab that's related, but then they want to say like, oh, I go water skiing or something, and it's something that you didn't teach them, but it's something that's personal for them. It's something that they want to know, but maybe only like a handful of kids really care about water skiing. I'm not going to include it in unit vocab, but if they want to know it, I guess where I struggle is, do I stop the whole class to teach them how to say water skiing, or do I put it on them to figure it out? I don't know.
I was muted. That's one reason I put it on the board, is so that I can refer back to it in case a bunch of people ask the same question. It's also another reason that like I have them like draw their vocabulary a lot of times ahead of time, so that we're picking words that everybody can use. And if it's just a couple of people, if they're going to have conversations about it, more than one person's going to need it anyway. So depending on what it is, like cause a couple of my kids are really obsessed with firefighting and volunteer firefighting, so like I generalize and it's like voluntarismo, and so like everybody knew that, and they could use that, so they could ask them about it. With the like como se dice, like when they're trying to summarize a line or something from the song, then I'll put it on the board and I'll have the reference to point back to it, but I don't necessarily stop everything and have people do that and add it to their list. So I avoid that 2 ways. 1, by having them help with the construction of the original unit list, and 2, by just posting it and letting them ask about it so I have it to refer to later. What about you guys?
I do that too at the beginning of the unit. I try to kind of cull vocabulary from the kids, particularly in that hobbies unit, because what, I think is cool and fun to do is not what most of my students think is cool and fun to do. So I will kind of have them write down, like, what are your 5 favorite things that you love to do? And then I go through and I just look at those words, and I make sure, I hit the big ones that are appearing frequently. And if I have a couple of those outliers, like I had one kid who was into horseback riding, it was literally one kid. I just made a little note on her paper about how to say it in Spanish and gave it back to her. And that was it. And it didn't take a whole heck of a lot of time. My cheerleaders are the only ones who care about saying cheerleading. And I can pull the 4 of them in the one class aside and say, all right, here you go. But for the purposes of when we're having our conversations, you might just want to use, like sports. And kind of stay general like that, so that we do have a core set of common vocabulary. And then that's also a great opportunity to bring up, people don't really go quadding in Spanish-speaking countries. People don't really, cheerleading, kind of a foreign concept. So it's a good opportunity to open up some cultural discussion as well, I think. But I wouldn't not teach them the word necessarily, particularly if it is something that is of high personal interest. Because that's the one that's going to stick with them. They'll be 85 years old in a nursing home, and they'll remember how to say montar a caballo.
Going back to the heritage speakers, I kind of bring them in sometimes. With Spanish being my second language, I don't know how to say everything there is to say in Spanish. And I let them know that, there are words I've never needed to know before, and so I don't know how to say them. And so I'm just trying to think of examples. Like I think we were doing a school unit and they were trying to talk about, I don't know, something in physics, and I can't think of the word right now, but they were asking how you say something, and I was like, you know what, I've never needed to know that before, so I don't know how to say it. And then so I posed the question to my heritage speakers, and some of them are like, I've never needed to know that either, so I don't know how to say that. But then sometimes, some of them will pipe up and say, oh yeah, it's whatever it is. So sometimes you can bring in the heritage speakers that way. But when it's something that I have no idea how to say, I've never needed to know it, and nobody else in the class knows, then I have to put it on them. But I guess it's just the struggle of, if it's something basic that I can tell them in 3 seconds, it's almost like I have a hard time struggling on do I put it on them to figure it out, or do I take 3 seconds to let them know, because it's a lot faster, but then I'm just giving them the answer.
I don't trust my kids at all using any sort of a dictionary. Online, paper, and that's just, I'm not going to get into a whole debate about, do kids need to know grammar terms and all of that, because I really don't think that they do, but they'll pick the wrong word when they go to word reference and they look it up. They're going to go with the first thing they see, and that totally may not be what it is. So I'd rather, take the couple seconds and do it than, and I understand the importance of fostering independence and, independent learning, but at the same time, I'd rather them be accurate at this stage of the game. If they're 14 years old, 15, they're going to mess it up. So
we've kind of been trying to go the opposite route. We'll have, at the beginning of the unit, we've designed the vocab list, but then we'll give them a chance, hey, add 5 terms that interest you or apply to you to each section. So whether it's, sections like personality descriptions, physical descriptions, hobbies, sports, take a second, and we let them use their phones. I know everybody has their own opinions on that, but look it up and add, and then we share, and I'll write on the board. So that's at the very beginning of the unit. But when they ask me, como se dice, I sometimes get a little sassy on them, like, no soy diccionario, like soy maestra, soy mujer, I go through a list of things, but no soy diccionario. And so I try to use that, though, as an opportunity to maybe sit with them, especially if they're doing independent work. Sit with them, and they can pull out their phone, and we'll look it up on word reference. And I'll show them, well, here you see the ESP. Well, that means that this is like a term more frequently used in Spain. Or you see the PR. Well, okay, here, this is Puerto Rico. Or you could see the V here. That's verb. And are you looking for a verb? No, we're looking for an adjective here. But this is where my inconsistency comes in. Sometimes I do falter and just give them the word, especially, if we aren't using independent work, or if there are 5 other hands raised while we are doing an assignment, I've got to get around or whatever. So that's what I try to do. I'm not always successful, though.
It's very interesting because, my feelings on dictionaries have changed a lot over the years. And at first, I had the feeling that you give a man a fish, like you give a man a word, he eats for a day. You teach a man to fish, he eats forever. And so like I was very big on teaching dictionary skills for a long time, and I still show them word reference, and we talk about why word reference is better than translator, because you can choose, you can look at the examples, and you can get it wrong, or you can. And the translator can get it wrong, and you won't be able to choose. Except that Google Translate now has like a dictionary thing on the side, so you can back it up a little bit. But we talk about what to use and why. But like having the essential verbs ready has helped them rely on what they do know. They form a lot more cognates, make them up out of nothing sometimes. But I mean that's what you have to do in conversation. And like the more I think about what novice means, because that's almost entirely what I deal with, the more I think I want them to not have to rely on a dictionary yet. Like they don't have to go to the dictionary at this stage because they're little baby parrots if they're novices in theory. So I will tell them, because in the real world, if they need to know how to say something, they're going to ask. And I want to encourage them to ask their conversational partners in their audience, their interpersonal audience, I guess, to clarify, because that's what they're going to want to be able to do right off the bat. And when they're writing their 10-page papers in Spanish in college, they will definitely need a dictionary. But if they just want to talk to somebody at Walmart, I think the skill to be able to ask the right question is a little bit better, is a little bit more relevant to where they will be. Now, Regina asked, is that a procedure that all of your students are aware of? Like how you get the word, I guess she's talking about. And I don't explicitly teach that. I explicitly teach the word reference versus translator a little bit, but I don't explicitly teach the order. Do you guys tell them? I explicitly teach como se dice, como se escribe, but do you guys make your students aware of how to get what they need out of you vocabulary wise?
I have posted on the front of the room. I have como se dice en español and qué significa blank in inglés and como se escribe, all that stuff. So they need to know that that's what they're supposed to ask in Spanish. And I tell them, my reasons. I lead them to word reference at the beginning of the year, and 90% of them will still go to Google Translate. And I try to explain to them, that Google Translate doesn't know which meaning of the word you actually want. And I use the example, like, if you type in fish, it doesn't know which fish to get. If you put it in word reference, it'll tell you, like, oh, well, the animal fish is pez, but the food fish is pescado. And if you mean, like, two fish, it's pescar. And so they're all different. It's the same word in English. They're all different in Spanish and all of that stuff. But one thing I was thinking about doing this year, but I didn't know if it was going to be a waste of time since the students really don't buy into word reference. I was thinking about like having an activity where like I tell them like look up go to word reference, look up this word and tell me how to say it, like give me all the different meanings, and like which one is the noun and which one is the verb, and kind of like, I don't know, so that they get used to it, they get more comfortable with it, because I think a lot of them just get overwhelmed when they look at the word and they see a giant list of possibilities and they're like, well, I don't know which one, so I'm just going to go to Google Translate and they'll give me one answer, and I don't care if it's right or wrong.
I haven't really had the problem with the kids being worried about word reference, or being overwhelmed by it. Some will still go to a translator and they'll put the wrong things in, and we'll have a talk, and they might have to redo an assignment if it's clearly from translator and they didn't pick it out. And we'll talk it out, and then I'll maybe have them redo it if they do use translator, or if they use word reference poorly, I guess, because that would be doing the same thing as a translator basically. So the procedure for me, if they have used a translator, or if they get the word so wrong it looks like they use a translator, then my procedure is redo. Like I put please see me in capital letters on Google Classroom, and then they have to come see me, or it stays blank or a 0, and they don't get a grade until they come see me and we talk about it and they redo it.
I would say in order to try to minimize, I really don't give kids a lot of work outside of class, because what's going to happen is some of them are going to take the easy way out, and they're going to enter something into Google Translate and then hand that in. So if they're writing, I want them to be doing it in front of me, so that I can be there to coach them if they have those como se dice questions, and I say to them, well, I'm not going to necessarily be the only one looking at this work, so we want to use language that we all have in common, so that I'm not, it's not just me and Anna who can understand you, that the rest of the class can understand you. So again, I think going back to what you had said, Laura, about simplifying kids' ideas, and getting them to think, okay, let's take that idea, and that algebra is the most awesome class ever, and what is the simplest idea we can get from that? I really like algebra. Okay, go with that. You know how to say that. So there's lots of ways to get across the same message, and trying to get them to see that is one thing that I think is really helpful. And like you, if I have kids on the chance, somebody may have snuck out a phone during an assignment, and it's fairly obvious that they've used Google Translate or whatever. My first thing is I'll call them up and I'll say, tell me what this says in English, and 99% of the time they have no clue what they even wrote. So then I'll say, okay, so when are you going to come back and do this again? And then have to put it on them, because right now it's going to go in, and I know I don't want to get into a giving zeros versus not giving zeros debate, but I said as of now it's going to go in as a 0, and then when you come back and you redo it in front of me with your phone face down on my desk, then you'll get another grade and that 0 will be replaced. So that's kind of how I handle it now, but I really do try to minimize any sort of their outside writing that's going to be for a grade, because honestly it just ends up being more work for me in the long run. I'd rather be able to be there to monitor what they're doing, and again, to give them that support of how can you reword that, think about what you need to do to simplify that idea. So.
And one thing that I need to add to my own procedure for that is the conversation helps, the taking their time, which is also your time, helps, but I really need to be more consistent about the calling home, because they feel like they're getting away with it if they do it. Like I would put the 0 up there, and the 0 just stands until they fix it. And the 0 sometimes draws a parent's attention to it, so they'll do something about it. And then if I put just please see me, then they're not getting the accusations in writing or whatever. But I feel like keeping the parents in the loop is probably the next step to preventing more of that too. Because like my kids did the writing on computers, so like I'd circulate, but they were on their laptops, and so like if someone had
Right.
translate up, I would shut it down or whatever. But there's not, without that extra step to the process of touching base at home, they might just be like, okay, well I'll just redo it.
I've
So,
had parents not understand why it was considered cheating, that was an interesting conversation.
did you just say like they don't understand what they wrote, so it's not their work?
Yeah, I said it's not their work. Well, but it's like using a dictionary. I said, no, but it wasn't like using a dictionary to look up a word or two. And I always go back to the idea with the kids, and I explained this from day one. I'm never going to ask you to do something that you shouldn't technically be able to do, given what we've done in class, given what I've taught you, given what we've practiced. Are people going to be able to do that task to varying degrees? Absolutely. But everyone should be able to do the task to some level. I'm never going to ask you, I don't need some existential essay in Spanish 1. I'm going to ask you to, tell me what your family's like. And however you choose to do that is how you choose to do that. So
that's a very important thing to establish what you're doing with that. And like is saying that you will be able to do this without it. And another thing that's very important I've found is I do let them use a dictionary sometimes, but I like when we do the IPAs, this is not the time to use a dictionary. This is the time to use what's in your brain. If you don't use what's in your brain, you're going to have to redo it, and have to add the call home thing. But like if you're working in your journal kind of thing, if you're trying to have a conversation, if you're trying to write something for the project for your presentation, look it up. That's fine. But if we're doing an IPA, now is not the time to do that. So like clearly establishing when it is okay, establishing the time and the place. I think that's probably the key for everything that is forbidden. Phones, dictionaries, translators, time and place. This is the time, this is the place, this is not the time, this is not the place. And if we can just remember to do that with pretty much with MP3 players, then I think we could solve a lot of our own problems with just those simple routines, like when is the time, when is the place, and reinforcing that. We have about 10 minutes left. Were there any particular routines or procedures that you guys really wanted to get into today?
Does anybody have anything specific that they start class with?
You guys know I do. I got my daily choros, and we do that. Depending on the class and how I set up, we do this 3 or 4 days a week. We don't have class on Fridays because our early college is very fancy and special that way. So we either do it 3 or 4 days a week, and we depending on Spanish 1 or 2, they do different things with it. So Spanish 1, they listen to it, then they start breaking it down, they rehearse it, they listen to it, rehearse it, and then they perform it at the end. Spanish 2, they listen to a bunch, break them down, discuss them, and then we do a performance interpretive kind of thing for that at the end. And so like they have that just about every week, and I feel like it really sets the tone for actually the risk taking, because they're kind of singing, they're mostly just kind of chanting, but also it sets the tone for the not understanding every little thing and picking out what they do understand. And so that's what I do for most of my starters. What about you guys?
Do you link those to what you're doing, like thematically, or are they just random?
They're for fun. They're whatever I think the kids will get into and get stuck in their head forever and ever. I look for things that have like the essential verbs and familiar vocabulary, so they're hearing similar word patterns over and over. But it's mostly for setting the tone linguistically for me.
Because all I've been doing is I have like a daily, I call it a para empezar. It's their warm-up activity where they know it takes up the first couple minutes, so they know that they have to come in, they have to sit in their seat, they take out their notebook, and it's projected on, I have an Apple TV, it'll be projected on the Apple TV, and it's something they have to, some kind of an activity. It might be a meme that they have to describe, it might be an open-ended question that they have to answer, it might be, if they are having a hardest time with their preterite verbs, it might just be like a basic, like fill in the blank with the verb and the preterite, just activity to get them like thinking and like their minds back into Spanish to start the class. And then, when I do notebook checks, I go through to make sure that they have, there should be 5 for the week. The one day of the week that I do differently, I do música miércoles. So every Wednesday they come in and they get a song, and I'll take requests from them. So some of them like requesting different songs. I try to explain they have to be school appropriate. So I'll play a song in Spanish and have them most of the time. Well, this past year I just taught 1 and 2, so most of the time I just play the song and have them write down words that they can pick out that they know in Spanish, and I just have them jot down a list of Spanish words. And then after the song, we'll go over those words. I'll say, any idea. I'll tell them the title and who sings, and I'll say any idea what the song's about. And then, assuming the music video is also school appropriate, we'll watch the video so that they can kind of see the story unfold.
Yeah, that's another thing I look for, is for ones that have actual music videos as opposed to lyric videos, and ones that won't get me fired. Because my principal likes to come in and she's like, so where's the song if we're not doing a song one day? And she'll like come in and do her little weird principal dance or whatever. And she likes it, the kids like it, and I think they like hearing the song down the hall, and it like gets everybody thinking in Spanish. Regina has her bell ringers over here. She's inspired by Alison Weinhold. She has a good one for listening interpretation. I really need to do more with that. Memes, martes. Música miércoles, like you do, Jennifer. Video jueves. I'm not sure if that's music videos necessarily or what. And then there's baile viernes, and that's a really cute thing that I've seen of Alison's. And so she has some variety, but it's also routine, so the kids know what to expect, and they get it shaken up a little bit. And she also says with each activity, the students have questions in Spanish to answer. So like they're always doing a little bit of either interpersonal or interpretive.
I like to start with as the kids are coming in, like I'll have we have to be out in the hall in between classes. So I'm out in the hall, and there's something projected on the screen for them to look at. Sometimes it'll be a meme. Sometimes it'll be a trivia crack question in Spanish, which they love. Ones that are full of cognates. And I tell you what, I did that fairly consistently last year, and I was really impressed with some of my high flyers. Granted, they're the 4%ers, but at the vocabulary that a lot of them are really able to just kind of absorb from doing that. And then once I come back into the room and I greet them and we start, we'll go over either the meme, and I'll say, all right, why is this funny? Explain to me why this is funny. Or I may ask for a translation. I know some people would have me fired for that, but I may ask for a translation. I may ask a personal question about it, or we'll go over the trivia crack question. And I use Class Dojo a lot for bonus points. And Jennifer, I think you had asked something earlier about risk taking, and that's one thing that I use to encourage risk. I only ever give the little participation badge, and how I have it set up is once kids collect 10 badges, they get bonus points on an assignment, and it has no effect on their overall grade whatsoever, but they don't know that. And I have kids who will do just about anything for a badge. Now, I have some who at the end of the entire year had 10 for the year, but the kids really get into it, and they like to see, like, sometimes I'll even project the Class Dojo screen, and they'll see, like, oh my God, Carlos has 105 badges for the year, you know, because the kid answers the journal question every single day. And then once we go over the trivia crack or the meme, I project a calendar that has the day and the date of the week, our I can statements, and then our agenda. We go over that, and then we get into whatever it is we're doing. And again, I kind of keep Class Dojo up, and if somebody does something like absolutely extraordinary during class, then they may get a badge for that. Or again, if they volunteer, they don't necessarily have to be right, but if we're going over a listening activity, and we all know how freaked out kids are with listening to native speakers, particularly authentic, you know, audio examples, they're really, I might be wrong, you know, but you know what, but you took a risk, and I'm glad that you took a risk, and that's okay. You know, so kind of encouraging them a little bit that way with, I know it's all external motivation, but hopefully it'll lead to some internal motivation at some point, and the realization for some of them that it's okay to be wrong, but it is important to try.
Girl, I love the badges and the gamification. I use Class Dojo to keep track of how much they use the target language versus how much they resort to the L1. And so, like, we can get a percentage for the whole class at the end. And it's just kind of a goal. But, like, I've also done with Classcraft. And, like, if I hear them speaking, we'll say 90% in the target language, then they get, like, 100 points for their character, and they can level up. And it's weird, but they had fun with that, even though that didn't really have much of an effect on their grade either. But the characters are there. And,
I was just going to say, Class Dojo was something that I was toying with, trying to start out for this year. I almost brought it in partway through last year, and then I was worried that it was too young for high school, but then I found out an English teacher at our school started it like halfway through the year, and he said that the kids were obsessed, and like they turned it into like the biggest competition, and he was teaching juniors and seniors, and even the seniors were, you know, freaking out that they needed to lead the class or whatever and get whatever prize. I forget how he set it up in terms of what you get at the end. But so that was something that I was toying with trying to do this year as more of a motivation, because I put in last year in my syllabus that participation was part of their grade and that I would track it, you know, how much they were participating. And like you said, they didn't have to be right, they just had to be speaking. And it just wasn't the most organized way in terms of how I was factoring in how much they were participating.
And sometimes I don't tell them that they're going to be getting badges necessarily for volunteering. Sometimes it's on a whim. Like, you know what, I'm just going to give badges. Every time somebody answers something today, they're getting a badge. When they hear that little ding go off, though, if I'm not projecting the screen and they're just looking at, or they're just hearing it from my computer, they hear that ding go off, man, you would be shocked at the hands that start flying up. And I tell you what, they love their little avatars, and if you let them choose their avatar, they're in seventh heaven. It doesn't matter if they're 14 or 18 years old. They're pretty cute. They look a lot like the Monsters, Inc. characters. So
that's what I was going to say. The one thing I bribed them with is like, oh, you want to change your monster that was randomly assigned? Oh, you're going to have to get to this level for the speaking this many times. Okay, well, we are about at our time limit. Any final thoughts before we conclude? Have I already lost Melissa? Okay. Well, thank you very much, ladies. We covered a lot of territory today, from heritage speakers to badges and gamification to, we had like a whole bunch of student choice, everything in between. So thank you very much for a very enlightening discussion, and we will get this posted on the LangCamp Wiki. The next LangCamp Hangout will be next Monday at 8 p.m., and we'll be talking about circumlocution, which is another thing we actually started touching on today. So that will be a good follow-up. All right.
Thanks.
All right. Have a great summer, guys.
Bye-bye.
Adios.